to The Creator's Journey with the Halfling and the Spaceman. We love talking to creators about their journeys. And today we are excited to have with us John Van Stry. John is the author of several military sci fi series, and he has, as well as other genres. And he has just released not one but two books in different series. He just cranks them out. I'm telling you. Uh, the first one is I'll have to look at my note here. I apologize. Endgame, which is Wolfhounds Book 6, and the other one is Sometimes in the Fall. There you go. And the other one is Sometimes in the Fall, which is book 2 of the Seasons series. So welcome, John.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. We appreciate you taking the time out of your obviously busy schedule. If you're cranking them out like that, we really do appreciate you coming in and taking the time. Um, So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling, as they say. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you decide to start writing.
Writing is something I've done all my life. I've always written. It's because I've been reading science fiction, fantasy, and everything since the 60s when I was in elementary school. Um, so it's just, I always read a lot. It was always the hope, and the dream in the back of your head. Oh, one day maybe I'll be an author. I've worked in a lot of different things over the years. I've worked primarily in tech. I've had some very interesting hobbies, one of which I used to own and raise big cats, motorcycles, cars, martial arts, shooting, just a lot of stuff, flying. I was a pilot. So there's a lot of different things I've done, mostly tech, but not all of it. So I'd written a number of longer form stories because I used to write short stories and stuff.
Mhm.
And at one point, I did try to get published back in, man, the 80s, late 80s. That really didn't work out because the market was changing. Actually, I submitted that book, I think it was around 92 or something, but I'd written it in the late 80s. So I decided, okay, I had a girlfriend at the time who was a best-selling author, and I looked at how much money she was making, and I was a consultant, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to be an author. They weren't making a lot of money back then. So I just continued on. Then the world of self-publishing came along. And at that point, I had written several novels, most of which I'd written for myself. I'd shown to some friends and things, but I had never intended to publish.
Mhm.
My stepson gave me a Kindle in 2011 for Christmas. And I'm looking through the ebooks. I'm like, wow, these things are really expensive. And then I said, what are all these cheap ones that are like, cheap ones? They're like $3, $4. Oh, those are indie authors. And I read a few of them. I said, hey, I can do this. So I started putting stuff up I had written, and
Mhm.
it sold. Didn't sell great, but it sold. And suddenly I'm like, I have a hobby. And I started doing this on the side. And I had a lot of stuff I'd written, not all of which was finished. And but I started learning the market. I started learning what people wanted. I started learning how the ebook market works, how the self-published market works. And by 2014, I took a series that I had written quite a few years ago, and I put that out. I put the first book out, and the response was such. That was my first real big bestseller that I decided, you know what? Maybe I don't want to be a consultant anymore. I'm spending too much time on the road, too many months away from home.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much, and that series was called Portals of Infinity. Matter of fact, I started book 12 of that today. I only put a book out in it now every couple of years because it's my first love and it sells. But
Mhm.
I have bigger things I've been doing that have been selling far, far better. But every once in a while, you got to write one for yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's probably one of the things that keeps you in the game is every once in a while putting one out there for yourself.
Yeah, I tend to call them passion projects. It's got my
Mhm.
passion and everything, and if other people like it, that's great. If they don't, well, maybe I won't write that particular passion again.
Well, John, one of the things we talk to people about is their creative side from their fandom perspective. So, what is your greatest fan love? What's the biggest thing you're a fan of?
That's a really hard one. I mean, I used to be a huge science fiction fan and fantasy. I mean, Robert Heinlein and Roger Zelazny were the people who I literally grew up with. I mean,
Mhm.
everything they did, I read. When I first started writing, I wrote first person singular because that's what Roger Zelazny did. And I was just so fascinated with that whole thing. Um, so those were probably a lot of my stuff. Science. I mean, I think Heinlein had a lot to do with me. I was in band in high school and I did music and I was decided, no, I want to do something different. I mean, I grew up with the space race. So, it was the whole thing. I want to be an astronaut kind of stuff. And I went to engineering school and got an engineering degree and I worked in defense quite a bit. I mean, I went to the Air Force. I worked in flight tests for a number of companies, starting with Grumman Aerospace. Then I ended up at General Dynamics and Lockheed and all this stuff. So I was a huge fan of tech, and I've worked on a lot of bleeding edge tech. Got into computers at a very early age. So, but on the other hand, I do have a love of nature. I grew up camping. My family always went camping every summer. So I have a bit of a nature aspect as well, and I like animals. I used to train animals as a hobby, not as a living. So I'm kind of like all over the place on a lot of it. I'm just not really too focused on some things.
Okay, okay, certainly. Well, I'm a massive a fan of the Heinlein juveniles.
Yeah.
I mean, Have Spacesuit Will Travel is probably my single favorite book. So I certainly understand and of course, The Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, so yeah, the ones that you mentioned are ones right up our alleys. They're so very similar. uh, well, so I have a question in regards to early fandom. When you were a kid, did you watch cartoons? Did you watch anime? Did you read comics? Or things like that?
I watch cartoons. I mean, Bugs Bunny and Warner Brothers were the big ones.
There you
Um,
go.
Anime didn't exist when I grew up.
uh,
Okay, there was no such thing as anime.
yeah.
Now, there were some cartoons that made it over, like, Tobor, the Ape Man. I don't know if you remember that one. I forget what it was
Hmm.
called in Japan. Um, was it Rocket Boy or Jet Boy? I cannot remember what that one was. So there
Astro
were some of
Boy.
those.
Astro
Astro
Boy,
Boy,
maybe.
that's it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And and some of the marionette series, like Fireball XL5, Thunderbirds. So those were around. Anime really didn't start showing up here until probably, oh man, early '80s. I know there were
Mhm.
people who did a lot of fan stuff with that prior to that, but I really wasn't aware of that too much. Comic books, I was never a fan of comic books because the stories were too short. And some of them got a little too preachy for me.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I grew up fairly technical. I grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of very technical people. The vice president of Grumman Aerospace. I went to school with his son. He eventually became the
Hmm.
president. We had like a couple of Nobel Prize winning physicists in my neighborhood. The head of
Wow.
ABC lived in my neighborhood. And this is a small neighborhood, not a rich one, but there were just a lot of very famous people there
Hmm.
who I got to meet. And so I became a bit more, I guess, jaundiced in my view of comic books because I was seeing people who were living this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
who were
Yeah.
doing this kind of stuff. So I was never a huge fan of those. And also I started reading hardcore science fiction like in the sixth grade, seventh grade. So I was seduced into that stuff way early because my sister read a lot of this stuff and she used to give it to me.
Uh-huh.
You know, I remember when Lord of the Rings went around and how big that was in the late '60s, and you've seen it everywhere. And
Mm.
my aunt read it, my mom read it. Eventually, well, it's sitting on the coffee table. I'll read it.
So, you're talking about uh, some of the kids that you went to school with and the people in the neighborhood that you were in, and I'm just curious. I guess with your interest and the neighborhood that you lived in and the schools you probably attended, you probably weren't, looked at as weird or strange or anything for any interest that you had, right? Because a lot of a lot of those interests were similar, right, to other kids in your school.
Yeah, I was pretty much mainstream in everything when I was in school. I mean, yeah, I was on the chess team, so that's a little different than most. On the other hand, I was also on the lacrosse team, so they kind of balanced out.
Hmm.
But no, I was just pretty average in a lot of the stuff I was interested in. At least I think I was. I mean,
John, how does your love of classic sci-fi, Heinlein, Zelazny, how does that drive your writing?
um, I think it drives a fair bit of it. But one of the things I grew up in New York, and we used to get a lot of like Brian Stableford stuff like that, English authors, and we get them from English presses. These were not coming from American presses, so these were written in more British English. So I have a tendency when I write and tell stories, I tend to tell it more like the British authors do. So my approach to the English language is a little bit different. The way I construct stories, and I've had friends ask me, it's like, did you grow up in England or something like that? Because a lot of your stuff reminds me of British authors.
Hmm.
And I said, no, but where I grew up, I used to be able to get those books really easily.
Hmm.
And there were a lot of great British authors.
Yeah.
But there's a certain amount of the storytelling. There was a thing people used to make fun of Highland heroes because of how competent they were. And I used to sit there and say, well, then I guess I'm a Heinlein hero and I must not exist because I've got a BSEE. I wrench on cars and motorcycles on the weekends. I've raised animals. I've grown stuff. I've built houses. I do all this work and I've done it all on my own because I grew up around this stuff. I mean, my dad was a World War II vet. I grew up on a street full of World War II vets, and these guys were all like do it yourself kind of people. And
Hmm.
they'd show you how to do stuff. If you didn't know, they'd teach you. It was no big deal to any of these people. So I'm a pretty self sufficient guy. I always have been.
Hmm.
And I think some of that comes from Heinlein because I noticed a lot of his characters were always competent. And if they weren't, they'd go out and figure out or find out or learn what they had to learn to be competent.
That's right. And Heinlein said specialization is for insects.
Yes, very much.
And the elements of your fandom loves, how do you express them in your books?
Um, for the most part, I do occasionally I put little jokes and Easter eggs in. A lot of pop culture stuff. I hide them all over the place. Well, pop culture for me, though, there's more recent stuff I see, but I will make callbacks at times to older pieces of fiction or older movies and stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen Wizards by Ralph Bashki. It's one of my
Oh
favorites.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a couple of callbacks to that. Fritz, they killed Fritz. What's Plan B? Oh, you're gonna love this. I put stuff like that in there occasionally, and I see who gets it.
uh,
And sometimes I try to make it really low key so people they won't get it right away. Maybe they'll get it on a second or third reading. I like to put those things in. And also, it's like I have a Patreon and all that, and a subscribe star, and even a Substack. And on the Patreon and subscribe star, I'll post stuff I'm working on.
Hmm.
And I like it when I get feedback from fans who'll sit there and say, "Well, this isn't clear. Oh, I don't think this agrees with some of the stuff you've said for these, prior you've written for these reasons." And so it makes me think. I like getting criticism from people who are fans when I'm working on stuff who want to see certain things Because when you get down to it, I'm an entertainer.
Hmm.
It's my job to entertain. So I want my fans to be entertained. My first goal when I started writing was I wanted to write books that people would enjoy. That was my only goal. If
Mhm.
I could make someone smile, yeah, that's what I wanted. Um, that I've had such great success that I'm a full time author. I mean, I'm coming up on 2 million books sold at this point. I've sold a lot of
Wow.
copies.
Congratulations.
Wow,
Oh,
that's
thank you.
awesome. That is awesome.
And it makes me happy that I'm pleasing people, that I'm giving people what they want, that I can take people's minds off of their troubles if they have troubles, if I can give them some form of enjoyment. That's why I try to write uplifting and enjoyable stuff. Anybody can make you feel bad. That's easy. Making people smile is hard.
That
Otherwise,
is
everyone would
very
be on
true.
stage as a comedian.
John, the thing with the Ralph Bakshi's Wizards just reminded me of a little story. About 2 years ago, I was asked to be on a panel about adult animation. So we sat down and we watched every Ralph Bakshi film, all of them, American Pop, I, even some of the more Fritz the Cat, Wizards. What was the one? Heavy Traffic.
Yeah, heavy
And
traffic.
so I was completely prepared to talk about the history of adult animation. And what they were talking about were like the DC animated films, like the Batman and the Superman. So I was just completely in the wrong element. And it didn't really help that I was like 30 years older than everybody else on the panel. So yes, times they do change.
Yeah, those aren't. I mean, DC does not do adult, not at all. I mean, when I hear adult anime or adult stuff, I start thinking, like you said, Ralph Bakshi, Kira,
Hmm.
Ghost in the Shell. I mean, stuff like that. Stuff that is, the real dividing line is between what's written for kids and what's written for adults. There is a dividing line, and it's a very
Hmm.
specific dividing line, and most people don't know what it is. Stories that are written for children, sex does not exist. Stories written for adults, sex does exist. That doesn't mean you see sex or anything like that, but children's stories or juveniles, there is no driving force of I want a girlfriend or I want to impress that woman or I want to do any of that stuff. Sex does not exist. In adult stories, though, because you have adults and you have adult relations, people do things for the purposes of I want a partner, I want a mate, this, even if you never see it, it's still in the world, that people fall in love, people get married, people have families and do all that stuff. And I think Heinlein was the one who talked about that. I remember reading about that back in like the early 70s. It's like that is the dividing line. And
Okay,
you can
that's a
tell
good
in
point.
stories, which it really is what comes to play.
Huh.
Well, we got to talking about specifically about the movie Heavy Traffic. And I was talking to a younger audience and I was saying, this movie deals with social decay, it deals with crime, it deals with gangs, it deals with race relations. And I said, so you need to be careful if you're watching this because it doesn't suit your sensibilities. And I had one of the younger audience members say, "Well, we have all these problems now." I said, "No, you don't confront them as bluntly as Ralph Bakshi did. Bakshi, the thing that he brought out in some of these movies like Heavy Traffic and Coonskin was how ugly these things are by actively portraying it. So he spoke not only in a mature fashion, but also in a mature way and accepted that the audience was mature, which is a completely different thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely you get that because I won't mention I won't mention the author in particular, but there was an author once who wrote this series that was very good. And the first book had a lot of more adult themes, even though there was no sex. But after that, it all went away. And I asked them why they did that. And they said, well, too many kids were reading the book and they felt guilty. I was like, okay, I can see you want to play to your audience, but on the other hand, it makes you wonder, and it's because it did get a little more cartoony in the following books in the series, which personally I was not that thrilled with. But
Well, can you tell us a little bit about what you might be working on now?
well, as I mentioned earlier, I just finished one novel for a series I write under a pen name that I'm wrapping up after 28 books. What I'm now starting is Portals of Infinity, Book 12, which I haven't come up with the title yet. I'm still working through the aspects of the plot. I started that today. Um, Once that's finished, I'm either going to write the next book in the Valley of Fire series, which takes place in the Wolfhounds world. That's
Mhm.
being published through Raconteur Press, and this is the
Mhm.
first book in that series, Misplaced. Uh, then I'm either going to write the sequel to book 3 of Seasons of Change, which would be the sequel to Sometimes in the Fall, or I'm going to see about starting a follow-on series to the Wolfhounds books. So I got to see. I want to write about 4 books hopefully by the end of the year, because unfortunately I missed a few months of writing this year because I had my shoulder joint replaced.
Oh,
So there was about 2 months where I really wasn't writing, and then when I got back into it, it was a slow start.
yeah. Mm.
So, Halfling, it looks like everybody we know is busy becoming a robot.
Uh, well, I had left hip replacement surgery 3 years ago,
I had
so
no choice. It was I
uh,
got basically.
mm, uh,
Well, John,
Yeah,
the
I was
hold
in a
on.
motorcycle accident about 20 years ago, so it finally.
oh,
Anyway, sorry.
oh,
No, it's okay. It's
no,
okay.
no,
You
no.
know, no, we just happen to know a lot of people who had joint replacements. Of course, you can't tell by looking at us, but we're of the age that that starts to happen. But
Yeah.
getting back to the interview questions, one of the things we ask people is about their process. All creators have their own unique process. It's might be similar to others, but it's also has their own distinct flavor. Can you walk us through your creative process, how you take the ideas and where the ideas come from, and how you turn them into fully worked books?
My ideas come from so many places. I mean, I daydream constantly. There's always something going on in the back of my head. Wolfhounds series came from the Yes song "Yours Is No Disgrace," and many years ago, when for work and stuff, when I was working defense, I took quite a few cross country trips by car, having to go to places, new assignments, and I used to listen. I always listen to a lot of music, and there's a line in that song that always stuck in my head. And I think about it about, this would make a great science fiction space story and things. And so I wrote some of it down, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I wrote about 20, 30,000 words, and then I put it aside. Then a publisher expressed an interest in it when I was talking to them. So I wrote the first book, and they changed their mind, so I self-published it. And that was always going to be a whole series. But it all came from this idea of a story. I mean, from a song. Something went in my head, and it went from there. Other things, um, the weirdest things that can set me off. Like I wrote a series under my pen name, and I wanted to show people that I could write. I'm associated with a couple of particular genres, and I was like, I want to show people, no, this is how you do this genre right. And so I sat down and I had a whiteboard with about a very large bottle of Jameson's, which I killed about half of, and I plotted out the whole thing. And I'm working through all the stuff, and I go, what are the things I do right? What are the things I do wrong? What's this story going to be about? What do I want the aspects? and that was very much plotted. Um, Portals of Infinity was totally pantsed. It was like this guy stumbles through a hole in reality into another reality. What happens? And that
Mm,
just grew and continues to grow. And it's just all very different things. You know, oh God, what was the name of the author again? The guy who did the Animen and all that back in the 50s, in the early 60s. Um, I cannot remember his name at the moment, but I wrote a series that was sort of like that, where we have second class citizens because nobody wants to go into space because Earth is nice and safe. So they create gene engineered animal people. First, they tried doing humans, but there was too much Frankenstein complex, kickback, blah, blah, blah. And so you have this whole thing of what happens when you have a race of second class beings who are doing all the work and all the exploration. And that was Children of Steel, the first novel I really ever wrote.
mm,
So they come from strange places, my ideas. I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but the top two shelves back there are books I've written. Those are all my novels,
mm,
the ones that have made it to publishing. And Summer's End, which I wrote for Baines, is just an idea of here's this guy, he's got to get off Earth. And he has decided to become a ship's engineer, but he's got all these things chasing him, and he's got a past, and he wants to get away from all this, and it keeps following him while he's leaving. And it's all about basically him growing up and going out into the universe, well, the solar system, because faster than light drive has not been developed yet. So it is what is considered a near space science fiction story or series. And I wanted to think of what would happen if we had a diaspora where everybody's living in the solar system, because the solar system's pretty big, so you're not going to be able to control it. And after several hundred years of this, where are we at when we've conquered gravitational drive and understand gravity? Great. So we've got, tens of thousands of asteroids with people living on them in any kind of situation you can think of. So it's just the ideas come and I write them down. I mean, I've been thinking some of the Pink Floyd songs out there from the Animals have given me some ideas that I've got a whiteboard over here that I put tons of stuff on. It's just some get plotted heavily, some just get pantsed. And when I'm writing, the plot never survives contact with the typewriter, as you could say,
mm.
and things happen, and
Right.
suddenly a character takes off on their own. What my biggest thing is when I'm in the flow state, as a lot of people like to call it these days.
Mhm.
To me, I'm watching a play. I'm watching these characters, and I'm just writing down what's going on. I've built these people up in my head. I know how they're going to act. I know all sorts of things about them. I write a Bible for everybody I do. Um, and there's a Zelazny thing I used to. I don't do it so much anymore. But you write a story about your main character, and then you burn it. The whole idea being is that as time goes on, your memory of this becomes fuzzy, like a person's memory does. So things about how they remember something will change throughout the ongoing story because you want to bring that aspect of humanity to people. There's all sorts of little tricks. I've heard a number of them over the years from reading about writers. I am, by the way, because I know you'd asked about that and some of the stuff. I'm self-trained. I have never gone to a writing class in my life. I learned this all by myself. So
Mm.
I have a bit of a different style, I think, partially because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the writers that we had on our show, um, this is last year sometime, she mentioned that she always kept a little notebook with her, and everywhere she went, the least little thing could be an inspiration for her. Either to write a story or to write a poem. And she said, if she saw two people, like, obviously having a difficult conversation, like maybe they were upset with each other, in her mind, she started thinking about what could that be about, and she would write down some thoughts about, a difficult conversation that two people might have, that type of thing. Do you ever do that?
Not exactly. I don't write things down usually while I'm out, unless it's like I'm having problems with the title or something and I get a really good idea. Most of the times, I have a friend who's an artist, and I used to ask him how he comes up with what he draws. He said to me, I don't draw something until it's banging around in my head, making so much noise and destroying so many other things that I got to get it on paper. And I get it out, and now it's out of my head. And it's a bit like that at times with me. I'll have ideas, like I'll play a scene through my head 100 times, thinking it through until eventually it's like either I've resolved it and I'm done with it, or I'm like, no, I need to write this story, and and then I'll do it. I'll create a story with it. Um, and like I said, I have written stories so many different ways. I had a novel and I was finishing it up and I'm writing in a friend's universe and I wasn't happy with it. And I'm laying in bed and it's about midnight and suddenly it comes to me that the guy's been lying to everybody, including himself, the whole story. So I got up, went into, my office and I rewrote like the last couple thousand words and I made a bunch of notes so in the morning I could go through and do everything. And that does happen sometimes. Like I'll have a weird dream and I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I go, that'd make a good story. So I get up, come into the office, write a bunch of stuff on it, put it in the file, so to be revisited later if I want to. And the file's always great. Never nothing ever goes to waste. Sometimes I pull things out and I'll reuse them, and or I'll that never made it to publish. And I have done that more than once because sometimes you'll be stuck in a spot and you won't know what to talk about, and so you go to the file. And
Mhm.
there's a convention I was invited to once, Inkers Con, and it had to do. If you do a little research, there was a big copyright lawsuit I ran against pirates, and that's why there aren't so many pirates making money off of us as there used to be. Because I went to federal court over that. And this woman had an interesting thing, and she said, "When I get stuck and I don't know what to talk about, I talk about my favorite hobby. Suddenly, my favorite hobby is the character's favorite hobby, or whatever I'm into at the moment, and they talk about it, and that gets me moving again." I'm like, "That's a pretty cool idea." I wrote that one down. It's
Mhm.
smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, John. Well, it's time for us to start wrapping up. But the most important question of our interview is, where can people find out more about you and your books?
The biggest place is Amazon. Everything I have is on Amazon. Or you can go to my website, johnvanstry.com. All my books are up there. My pen name is at the bottom. So if you want to know about the urban fantasy stuff I write that under a pen name mostly. That'll take you to that website so you can look at that. But everything I have, I sell on Amazon. The stuff I do at Bain Books is on Amazon. The stuff I'm doing at Raconteur Press, that's on Amazon. So that's right now the easiest thing. If you put my name into Google, you'll find me. I'm the only John Van Stry in the world. So it's not a hard thing. My family name is, while very old, there's very few of us left. So I'm not a hard guy to find as long as you know my name.
Okay, we'll make sure we get that in the show notes.
Well, I do have sort of an off the wall question for you.
Uh-oh.
Well,
She's going off script. Watch out. Red alert, red alert. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
man battle station. No. I Okay, you've done so many different things and you've listed off, a number of things that you have done over over your lifetime, your career. If and the thing that you're really doing right now is writing. If you couldn't write, what would you be doing?
That's a tough one. If I couldn't write, I honestly don't know what I would be doing right now. I mean, I worked in tech for a long time. I worked with a lot of different stuff. I really prefer working for myself. If I couldn't write, I don't know. Well, I have a hobby. I make guitars. You can't see it, but there's a whole rack of them over there. I don't make that many, but maybe I would do that full time instead of just doing it as a hobby. Or maybe I'd go back into tech and take some of the ideas and stuff that I've had and try to start my own business because I really do prefer working for myself. But I honestly don't know. I don't give a lot of what ifs anything anymore. I guess I kind of got that from C.S. Lewis, who was like, never talk about what if, just what is. I deal with what's in front of me, and that's always been the way I've dealt with life. I deal with what's in front of me, and I've got no problems with going off and doing something completely different if I have to. But writing is something I've always wanted to do, and my plan right now is to do it for as long as I physically can.
Sort of like us with podcasting. I'm going to do this as long as, well, not as long as A, people will put up with me, and B, I'm capable of doing it.
I was actually thinking about Terry Pratchett. Were you a Terry Pratchett fan? Did you read Pratchett?
I've read some of Pratchett. I haven't read all of his stuff. All of his Discworld stuff. I read the first few. I also read one of the stories he wrote before Discworld that actually led to him writing Discworld, which I don't know if a lot of people know about it. That is actually kind of interesting. And it's about a company that goes around and they're the ones who create all the little Discworlds. And
Huh.
and this guy works for this company, and people who make these worlds always try to put little clues in the world so people will realize that what they're on is fake, and it's his job to make sure people don't do that. And it was a pretty funny story because Eric the Red ends up sailing off the side instead of finding America, and crazy stuff.
Right.
And it wasn't very long, and it's like then he wrote Discworld after that. I think that's what gave
Yeah.
him the idea. And it was a fun little story. But yeah, I know about the luggage and
Hmm.
Rincewind and all that. I didn't keep reading it because I ran into other things.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and we have really appreciated the opportunity to get to know you and find out about your journey, and how it is you have come to do everything that you're doing. So, thank you again for taking the time to join us.
We want to thank our audience again for joining us tonight, and we hope you've been inspired and entertained by today's guest, John Van Stry. And this is the Spaceman for the Halfling and the Spaceman podcast. Over and out.